Thank you. Thank you so much to Wayne and Bill and others for inviting me to participate in this conference and to talk about monetizing soil health. For those of you who know me, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I did in fact start working on this topic many, many years ago, back in the 90s, when we first started talking about agricultural offsets for climate change mitigation. And at that time, there was one potential policy approach for the agricultural sector to participate, and it was soil carbon sequestration. All these many years later, we actually have more potential opportunities, and we've done a lot of work in the soil carbon and greenhouse gas mitigation space. Unfortunately, carbon markets are very soft or stagnant because we don't have the right policies or approaches to actually create demand there. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about monetizing soil health. So what I do want to talk about, I have three things that I really want to cover. I'm just going to briefly touch on my organization, the Coalition on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, and tell you about what we do in this space, because we've learned a lot that I think can be applied to this group and help you as you move down this road towards how to monetize soil health attributes, which is incredibly important. I'll touch on what I saw as the charge from the Soil Health Action Plan, or the Action Plan for Soil Health, that has been laid out to you, and I'd like to take a very high-level approach into for this discussion and for your work going forward into how you actually wrap your head around getting involved in monetizing soil health attributes and participating in markets. It actually, for those of you who don't work in this space, there's a lot to be learned, but you can break it down quite easily. So I want to talk about the key concepts, what the steps are, and really what the remaining needs and challenges are as you begin to engage, so that you don't spend as much time as I have in this space. So SEAG, we're a multi-stakeholder coalition, and as has been pointed out, we work on voluntary incentive-based approaches to engage the agricultural sector in sustainability, climate change mitigation, ecosystem service markets. We feel very strongly that there are financial opportunities to be had for the agricultural sector in terms of the ecosystem services that you bring to bear, not only on the farm, but off the farm for society. So we do focus on those, monetizing those approaches, if you will. But really, and Karen did speak to this at lunch, this is a two-way street. Really, we have to bring the tools, the opportunities to the sector so that they can participate. We have to interpret the policies that are available and give the sector the tools to participate, because of course farmers and ranchers are growing food, feed, fiber, etc. They're not in this business, they shouldn't be. We have to bring these tools to them. So this is what my group has been doing for a long time, is creating those tools. And we do it by working in partnerships. It's really what you're here to do. We don't develop projects ourselves. We build capacity among those who are in fact building projects. We help to bring people together to say, how can we learn together and learn from each other so that not everyone is recreating the wheel or learning the same mistakes. We have 3 national level meetings per year, one in Sacramento, where we talk a lot to Karen and to the California Area Resources Board about how we incentivize greenhouse gas mitigation from the agricultural sector in a way that is beneficial to them so that we can scale these opportunities. And that's also beneficial to the California approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have 1 meeting a year in Chicago or the Midwest in July, where we really try to focus on what's happening on the ground. And then we have 1 in Washington, D.C. in the fall, where we try to engage with our public-private partners and federal agencies in terms of the things that we can do together. So going to the Soil Health Action Plan, so the goal, of course, is monetizing soil health. And the desired outcomes are establishing economic values of soil health from both the producer and the public perspectives. I think inherent in that statement is an acknowledgement that there are multiple ways to actually monetize soil health. And one of them is really to focus on what are the financial returns, what are the financial benefits on the farm to the producers. If we cannot convince farmers and ranchers what those financial attributes and benefits are, we are never going to scale the opportunities that we're here to talk about. It's one thing we've learned in carbon markets. We haven't always really looked at the value to the farmer when we've been focusing on policies and greenhouse gas mitigation, et cetera. We're still missing the target largely in the carbon market space because the protocols and the approaches that we have brought largely are not cost-effective and economically viable on the farm. Until we have greater demand and a greater market signal, they won't be. Let's not relearn that lesson in this space, and I think the action plan already acknowledges this. There's also a value to society. What is it about soil health that has outcomes that are positive for humans, for wildlife habitat, for the planet? I will touch upon this because this is where market-based approaches actually come to bear. And then what's the value to the private sector? These are your potential buyers, so it's very important to understand who in the private sector desires some of the very attributes that you are looking at and will be helping to quantify. So that's the kind of the high-level approach that I want to take. But first, I can't help it. I've been in DC for 30 years. I'm a policy wonk. I have one thing to say about policy approaches, and sorry to the policy group that has been taking this on. There's another way to look at this. This is positive incentives and there's perverse incentives in terms of policies. But one thing to think about, for instance, in terms of if you're just thinking about one attribute, reduce soil erosion, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers spends over $1.3 billion a year just clearing navigable waterways by dredging. $1.32 billion a year. That's a lot of taxpayer money to clear waterways. Here is a possible approach that you can take. If you can bring the data together and go to Congress and say, we can reduce these costs because we can reduce siltation from soil erosion on the farm, and we can help bring that cost down. That's one potential way to think about how you can monetize soil health benefits. USDA actually estimates that the cost of dealing with damage from wind and water erosion of soil is around $43 to $59 billion a year. To the extent that you can actually reduce that by improving soil health, again, this is a potential income stream that you can tap into to reduce those federal outlays. You just have to be able to make the economic case that your work can scale and can have a significant impact on these policies. And the last one, thinking about the benefit to the farmer. 1 ton of soil lost from farmland actually brings with it, it carries away $2 to $3 in fertilizer. This is a USDA estimate, it's kind of old. It might be higher than that now. But anyway, you just think about the economics of this, and these are potential ways to monetize what you're doing and increase the financial boost to your work. Now we'll go to what I'm here to talk about, which is monetizing soil health. And you have to think about this in terms of, for ecosystem service markets, asset value generation. You might not be creating a product that you can hold in your hand or put in a bag and sell in a market. You're talking about asset value generation. It might be, those of you who don't work in the marketplace, I want to walk through this very simply in terms of how you begin to approach fitting soil health attributes into a marketplace. First, you have to identify what your asset is, or your product. Again, it might not be a bushel of corn, but what is your asset? Is it improved water quality? Is it reduced erosion? Think about that in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve on the ground. And think about it in terms of number 2. To whom are these assets valuable? Because these are your potential buyers. These are the people you want to be able to say, I have this asset or this attribute. I want to be able to sell it to you. And the third is, this is the most important one, is you have to be able to quantify the benefit or the asset of this product for that potential buyer. This can really establish for you what that product is and how much you can get within the marketplace. And then you have to deliver the product at a reasonable price for your buyers. And thinking back to the policy example, you have to make the economic case that what you have to offer is cheaper than another way that they can get it, for instance. So let's apply this to ecosystem service markets. But first, why ecosystem service markets? Why are they important? Why are they a potential marketplace where you can actually sell soil health attributes? And it really comes down to natural resource supply and demand. Natural resources are actually under threat and experiencing scarcity, and they will continue to experience scarcity into the future. And that, in fact, creates value and a potential market. Why? It's because we have increasing population pressure straining natural resources globally. Climate change, weather variability that really are impacting not only our availability of natural resources, but accessibility when we need them. We see this already happening with water around the world. Scarcity issues being created. Also, and this has been touched upon, changing consumer demands and societal demands and desires. Increasingly, people want to know how their food is produced. They want to know that it's sustainably produced. They want to know what the impact is of producing that food on people, on wildlife, on the planet, right? Bringing this story together actually takes resources. Someone has to bring this story together and monetize that, if you will. And it's something that you'll be working on as you develop the plan. So I want to talk about a couple of key concepts of ecosystem service markets where I think you can actually sell some of these soil health attributes. This first one is actually really important. The nature of these markets is that they're largely transitional. They're not forever markets. You're not going to forever sell reduced erosion, for instance, on farm. What you're really selling to your buyers is the ability to transition from where you are and how you're actually producing agricultural products, what your management practices are now, to the future in which they're more sustainably produced. Right, where you have reduced soil erosion, where you have increased soil health. And it's really important to keep that into mind. Ecosystem service market transactions really can help you monetize these changes. And it's important for you to convey that to your potential buyers. Another key concept is they're still in the formative stages. The proof of concept has really been established. Again, I've been working in these markets for a long time. We've developed the framework, we've developed the infrastructure, a lot of the methodologies and protocols that you can utilize in the place, but they're not operating at scale. And there are still some steps that will need to be undertaken to get there. I would say that carbon markets and water quality trading markets of all of the ecosystem service markets are the most fully developed. Water quality trading markets, not as far along as carbon, but I'll talk a little bit about that because, again, there are some learnings that will apply to what your role is here. So what are the key next steps? Again, you have to identify those attributes that you believe that you can sell in the marketplace. These are just a few, and these are well known to this group. Reduce soil erosion impacts, improve water quality impacts, improve soil water holding capacity, all have attributes that are desirable to someone, whether it's the public sector or private sector. And figuring out to whom those attributes are desirable is part of your job moving forward. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how some of these impacts are useful or to whom they may be attractive to. Reduce soil erosion, for instance. There are a lot of agribusiness companies that move product by barge and who have significant capital investment in transportation infrastructure and waterways. If you can show them that some of the work that you will do will actually benefit their bottom line and prevent them from having to invest in changes to deal with siltation, as I was pointing out in waterways, there's a potential buy there for you, a market transfer. Another example is water quality impacts. Private sector entities with water quality or TMDL, which is total maximum daily load requirements of a regulatory water quality issue, for whom you can say, I can help you meet your TMDL requirements at a lower cost than the cost that you're paying now, that's a potential trade for you. That's an ecosystem service that you can sell to them. Same holds for water treatment plants who are dealing with high nutrient loading or sedimentation. If you can show them that some of the work that you'll do on the ground will reduce their compliance costs and how they actually deal with some of these issues, there's a potential trade there. And also think about NGOs who are working to conserve or preserve or restore wildlife habitat. They can either be potential buyers if you can show them that what they're trying to achieve you can do at a low cost, or they can be partners with you on the ground. And I think we've already talked about that. I know there are a lot of NGOs in the room, for instance, working in that area. So in terms of quantifying the attributes and the assets, this really requires agreement, and it was referred to and discussed earlier. It requires agreement of everyone around the table that the techniques or the tools or the methodologies you're utilizing to measure and quantify these assets are in fact rigorous enough. You do have to get good agreement around this, because if you don't have agreement, there will always be some folks perhaps questioning the integrity of the product that you're selling. So you need the agreement of everyone around the table that your methodologies and your quantification approaches and protocols are the right ones to ensure market integrity. And what an appropriate quantification method looks like, there are actually several different things that you should be thinking about. One, it needs to be cost effective at both the project level or the farm level, the field level, as well as at scale. We can't spend a lot of money actually measuring this, and I think someone referred to it just recently, and be able to scale this, because then there's not a lot of money coming back to the farmer who's actually implementing the practices on the ground. And that is in fact how we're going to help transition farmers and ranchers to new practices. You have to have adequate rigor for market transactions to ensure market integrity. I just touched on that. Also, you need quantification tools that are transferable across project attributes and activities. You don't want to have to use one tool or technology to measure water quality impacts and another to measure greenhouse gas impacts, for instance. Increasingly, people have been developing integrated tools, but it will be really important in this space in particular that you have integrated tools that can look at multiple of these attributes together. And they have to be user-friendly. If they're really complicated to use, if they're really expensive to use, you're not going to be able to scale this, particularly in the marketplace. So then I want to talk a little bit about the current status of carbon and water quality trading markets, given that I've spent a lot of time in this space. And again, you don't need to recreate the wheel here. So what we've learned, there have been a lot of development in terms of the rules, the metrics, the quantification approaches. They've been universally agreed pretty much within the carbon market space, not so much within the water quality trading space. But given that, you can actually, I think, adopt or adapt a lot of the work that's been done in the carbon market space and utilize it for what you're doing in the ecosystem service marketplace. Also, I think it's probably obvious to you, one of the reasons we started looking at not just greenhouse gases, but other issues like water quality, is that a lot of the same activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions on farm or on ranch actually have other environmental attributes, improvements in water quality, improvements in air quality. They actually improve wildlife habitat. And so there are a lot of common drivers and a lot of common outcomes. And again, you really need to look at market integration, not only at the tools that are able to capture and quantify those impacts, but you want to be able to capture them at a greater scale. You want to be able to look at systems as opposed to individual activities and the impacts of those individual activities. We really do need simple shared platforms for measuring, reporting, and verifying the outcomes to make this cost-effective for market development. And finally, one thing that has been agreed upon, and at first this was a little shaky within particularly NGOs, there has been agreement now that the stacking or bundling of credits, for instance, biodiversity credits, habitat credits, soil carbon or other greenhouse gas credits, as well as water quality credits, that is actually a desirable attribute. So if you can capture from a certain change in practice or a certain, say, change in systems, multiple attributes and bundle those attributes into a credit that has different values, greenhouse gas values, water quality values, that is actually something that is seen as beneficial. And again, if you can bundle or stack credits, you can perhaps get a greater financial return in the marketplace by showing all of those different attributes in the form of credits. So finally, I'll just wrap up with some key remaining needs in this place. If you're looking at monetizing soil health attributes, you will in fact need to look at the rule books and develop methodologies and protocols that are particular to the work that you're doing. But again, there's a lot to be borrowed from the carbon market and the water quality trading space. You don't have to start from scratch there. This is one thing to really think about. Quantification methodologies are important, but they all come with data needs. So it'd be important for you to understand what data you have that can be useful for quantification. What data do you need? There's both research data, field data, and in many cases, to establish your baseline, historical data that has to be collected. This can be very expensive and costly to do, so be thinking about that as you develop those quantification methodologies. What data is available? How will you collect it? One thing I'd like to really call out is we've spent a lot of time focusing on tools for quantification. There are some tools that have been developed either in the private sector or by the government that are not really transparent. We really can't tell what's under the hood, how these calculations are made, what the algorithms are. If you can't tell, if it's not transparent, if you can't assure a potential buyer that your tool or methodology or model is in fact robust and you can explain it, it can't be used in the marketplace, regardless of how people might think it's good. If you can't see under the hood, if it's not transparent, you will have issues in the marketplace convincing buyers and investors. And one thing is, we worked with someone once to develop an actual new methodology to measure nitrous oxide emissions, and we put it into projects and methodologies and went out to test it, and it didn't work in the field. I highly recommend that you field test your quantification tools, particularly these integrated ones, and don't spend a lot of time investing in something unless you test it. And then this last slide is really some existing ones, but I think a lot of this work is actually going to be done in different projects outside of the economics group, if you will. So aligning project development and implementation costs with the potential return on value in the marketplace. Temporal financing gap. If you undertake a project on day 1, you may not get paid in a marketplace until day 365 or even further out. So some innovative financing to help with either changes in practices, the risk that a farmer or rancher is undertaking in 3 to 5 years, or a new piece of equipment that they might need. There may need to be some innovative ways to come up with finance on day 1. High barriers to practice change, I think you're already dealing with that in some of your other groups. And then this last one, decision support systems and materials for farmers and ranchers to understand what the benefit is to them. Thank you.
So I'm sure you might have a couple of quick questions. I will yield to you to keep us on time and focused on that. We've got Sheldon and maybe Byron with microphones. Does anybody have a question? There's one in the middle.
A lot of the talk about economics is ignoring what it seems like the elephant in the room to me, which is the lack of economic benefit to landowners who have leased land. Could you comment on the challenge of creating appropriate incentives for that class of owner?
That is a problem, particularly since 50% of farmed and ranch land in this country is actually not owned. It's been a problem for us in terms of getting folks to think about investing in long-term projects if they can, in fact, ensure that they'll be there in 1 to 3 to 5 years. The way it's been dealt with in carbon markets in particular is to get a signed contract with the landowner. for a certain period of time to ensure that if you invest in a project or if you're going to participate in a project, that you'll get their concurrence in the form of a contract. It's still something to be addressed, and I'm not sure I have the answer.
So I'll just add 2 quick points. One, it was definitely a topic at this meeting last year where we talked about the need for a landowner strategy for this. But the other thing that I would add from a kind of macro guy perspective is that problem is going to get worse fast because the age of those landowners is getting high in numbers, and the next generation doesn't necessarily have that same appreciation for longer term land uses as opposed to immediate financial returns. So I think that problem is going to get worse fast.
I notice a lot of the talk is based on farming and ranching. Have you looked into breaking it down into more urban areas such as public spaces that people use, corporate campuses, universities? Because there's a lot of land there and you're dealing with a different group of people who may want to donate money to keep the park healthy. So you can look at monetizing the benefits of making very healthy parks, capturing carbon sinks and water management. And it's not so much that a farmer has to take a risk on doing this and hoping that they get their money back. This is more of a social thing where you have people that are going to want to spend money to make the parks as healthy and beneficial for the community as possible. So is there opportunities there that you see to monetize it? And obviously universities where you can open up young people's minds and really show them not just to protest Exxon, but hey, let's get in here and how do we actually sequester carbon? How do we make clean water and get their hands involved in it?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity there. It's never been the focus of my work. My work has always really focused solely on the agricultural sector. But I have done some projects with federal agencies, with private sector, where that has been a focus, and we've taken some of these learnings. But I haven't thought about it in terms of market-based approaches, frankly.
You mentioned the need for transparent tools. Is there a conflict between that need for transparency and the ability to protect the intellectual property behind those tools, possibly?
No, I think the real problem, and if Karen's still here, we experienced this in California in particular. You have to be able to show what the algorithms are, what the calculations are, everything behind, under the hood or behind the shield, if you will, to be able to show the level of rigor. In carbon markets in particular, and you have to know exactly what the uncertainty is that's associated with a metric. And if you don't, you have to apply a lot of conservativeness. So that reduces the actual amount of credit you can get based on the uncertainty. If you can't figure out, based on a model or a tool that you're utilizing, what the uncertainty is, you're going to take on a high uncertainty calculation, and that will reduce the amount of credit that you'll be able to get. That reduces how much you can monetize. So it is a problem if you're trying to utilize this in a marketplace, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Reed.